I understand.
That whole thing of, actually, no, I don't want to deviate.
Right. So I wanna show you what Daniel Brubaker shows in his book, right? So he's showing you an erasure, and I don't know which manuscript this is. It's somewhere in the book, but I'm flicking backwards and forwards, so I can't show you the name of the manuscript. So it may be the Fustat Umayyad Codex, or it may be another one. But what he's doing, he's got this picture, and the picture isn't a Christian makeup. It's given by permission. It's given by permission of the National Library of Russia. Okay, and it's of. Does it say? Right, I'd figure 46. I don't know what that is. Right, but what it's showing, if you look carefully, you can see that someone has scraped away the original ink. That's what this smudging is. Someone has scraped it away, as you can see here, scraped it away. Look, it's been scraped away, and then has written in fresh ink other words. Right, this is an example of what he's talking about, right? So this is an example using the word Allah. So housed in the National Library of Russia, Marcel 5. So it's a fragment. So this is like, it's not even a page of the Quran, it's not even a full copy of the Quran, it's like a fragment of the Quran. So it's part of a page. Okay, so it's the name of the fragment is known by academics as Marcel 5. Okay, that's what academics call it.
This fragment, yeah?
This fragment, right?
When it's been discovered?
It might tell me in the text, I don't know. Let's just read on a bit. Right, is a parchment of 17 folios. So that means it's 17 pages of the Quran from a large format Quran. And he goes on to describe the length, the height, the width of the pages.
First of all, let's say Hu Allah.
Right? Yes, but the point. Let me finish.
He is Allah, that's what he meant.
Right. The above correction is found in folio 2 recto. That's the name of the particular correction. In it, the word Allah Huwa, which is what you guys have just read. So that's confirming that Daniel Brubaker knows what he's talking about. Yes, and that's what he says here. Look, in it, the words Huwa Illah. Yeah, that's my pronunciation, bro. Let's go with your pronunciation. It's better.
No, there's a difference between Illah and Allah.
What does that say?
This is Allah.
There we go. He is Allah.
Allah. Yes.
Yes.
By the way,
And that's how Daniel Brubaker translates it. So Daniel Brubaker clearly knows Arabic because he's translated it in exactly the same way you do.
I need to mention one thing.
Because everyone's talking over me. So I'll try to lower my voice. You're quite right. I'm sorry for shouting.
Where is it in the Arabic?
So let's be clear, right? You even before I got to that sentence in the book, translated it identically in the same way that Dr. Daniel Brubaker translated it. Right. So the reason why I'm referencing that is I'm showing you that clearly Dr. Daniel Brubaker knows his Arabic.
Shall I be honest with you? Shall I be honest with you?
Yeah.
Are you ready to be criticized on evidence you've brought up, or do you want no one?
Yes, of course. But let me finish.
I'll just touch on the point.
So what?
I'll be done in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
You said we translating Daniel Brubaker's claim shows that he. Even if I show that to my little brother, he knows that. So it doesn't mean you're qualified. It just says he is Allah.
Right, can I reply to that? Because it, yeah, okay, I'll let you reply to that. So my point is that I am the fact that your little brother knows it and that you know it, and that Dr. Daniel Brubaker also knows it, shows that Dr. Daniel Brubaker is being fair with the text.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So let us progress the argument.
Doesn't interrupt on one thing though.
Yeah.
Because I'm not speaking on this one in particular, but I've seen this in general. A lot of these errors has been ascribed. You know, there is what we call abjad numerals, which means these numerals could literally be the number of the ayah. So I'm not saying this in particular, but it's been demonstrated in a lot of verses that the added thing is the number of the verse. It's not literally a new word. So this could be the case that it's just saying the huwa. It could be just saying that this is the number of the ayah. I'm saying
right.
Can I add it
No. Let me reply to these two, and then you can jump in. Right. So the point is, what is clear from the physical evidence is that someone came and altered the text. They scraped away the original ink and then they inserted a word that was not there before. Now, your argument, of course, is that it's the numerals. Could be the numerals. However, we showed in the other examples that it was actually other words. Yep. Right? Now, the point is, whether it's the numerals or other words, someone's coming along and tampering with the codex. Someone's coming along and tampering with the text. Okay. Right? Now, I just want to see if he actually states what the original words were. drawn in rather than in written. The huwa which extends into the right margin is likely part of the same correction, though it is at least possible. Right, hold on, let's say, I think he might have said it here. All right, both manuscripts 9. Right, it doesn't seem to suggest that he knows what the original reading was in this instance.
So the date.
Right.
I'll ask you about the date.
Got the date of what, sorry?
So when did he find about this errors?
Right, so this study that he's done,
Yeah.
I mean, his work, his study is published, so it's very recent actually, it's in the last couple of years.
The Quran has been changed.
Yeah. It's
Or one manuscript has been physically changed.
No, it's multiple manuscripts.
Multiple. And has that
Multiple
reflected
manuscripts.
into the modern era? Do you have different Qurans now?
Yes, you do have different Qurans.
No, 1 second.
Yeah, you do.
I want to know the
You have
date.
different Qurans.
You know, we
Today.
need the date because we have something called Birmingham Quran. You heard about it.
So
First century.
So in term, well, this is exactly the point. Is that
So how is that Quran they found in Birmingham was in the first century of Islam is no different from the Quran we got now?
actually that's not true.
Wow.
That
It
isn't
is
true. No, it isn't.
It's absolutely true.
really
We
isn't
read
true.
We
It's
already did
you
the
know-
scripture.
you know-
already
No,
knows it.
no.
I was
Even though a
actually-
lot of brothers
Bro,
knows.
bro,
Aki,
bro,
Aki,
bro.
you know
Sorry,
the-
hold on.
you know
Wait
the-
a second. Hold on. No. Let me reply to what you just said.
I'll let you speak.
The Birmingham Folio, right? When the original interviews were given by the scholars that have control of the Birmingham Folio, right? And I actually watched that interview in real time, right, on BBC.
I watched it.
Right,
So.
and I paused it and I repeated it and I wrote it down, the quote. I don't have it on me. But what he said was that it was nearly identical to the Quran of today. He didn't say it was identical to the Quran of today. Now let me ask you this question. Is nearly identical the same as identical?
Anyone could say anything though.
Just-
Does he have
just
evidence
say-
to
No,
provide?
answer my
When I
question.
read it,
Does he
when
have-
I see the text in the
And
Birmingham, I
I've-
looked at it in my own time. I read and write Arabic,
no
so I don't need someone
Yeah.
to tell me.
He's a scholar, bro.
Yeah, I don't care. I read and write Arabic. So he
If
can be a
he-
scholar. Read and write. Then has nothing
Remember
to
what the
do
guy
with-
said about going to people of learning?
No, of course you meant to. I'm not
Shall
saying
I-
that
shall
you're
I-
not meant to
No,
understand
no.
everything.
You don't need the scholar to.
I'm still waiting for you to answer my question.
Yeah, when I read that in the Birmingham Quran,
I'm still
when
waiting for
I
you to
read the
answer.
Quran I got now is the same.
So here's my question
There's
again.
no difference.
So here's what I
He
actually
said
asked you.
something,
Okay,
but I read the
All right, here's my actual question. You didn't answer. Is nearly identical the same as identical?
No, of course not.
It's not.
There you go. Is it? No.
No,
Is it?
no.
No. Is
No,
it?
it doesn't.
Right.
No.
So the scholar that is actually the one. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the scholar of Birmingham University. The Birmingham. No, it does. The scholar of Birmingham University. The scholar of Birmingham University who actually controls what happens to that text states, and he's an Arabic speaker, not just Arabic but classical Arabic. He states it's not identical to the Quran. It's nearly identical. Those are not the same
They
thing.
think the Arab
Okay, so
Christian
we've
or
let
all
you
of these
speak.
people, they're gonna let
We've
that
let you
go.
speak.
When
When I
they
wanted to
understand the
respond to your
language.
point,
and
you
then
said
they
you wanted
just
to touch on
let
a point and
Muslim
we let you
go.
listen
Remember
to
the
the
language,
others.
because
Very
of Arab.
Yeah.
That's the
With all due
language.
respect,
We're not gonna fool them.
Scholar,
What is there, not,
Let me just prove a point. Let's say me and you speak English, and there's one page of text, and we need to find out if this page of text is similar to the original. You speak English, and I speak English. However, I may be a bit more proficient at it than you. We can get 10 guys.
That's 100%.
It doesn't take a scholar to find out if there's a word missing or a change in the text.
That's fact.
He could proofread it. He could proofread it.
Matter of fact,
So if
in
a scholar
Salah,
comes,
what we do?
all the scholars, many of the people who give da'wah over here, who read Arabic clearly, they would have noticed. So,
It's not in the
Okay,
inside.
can I-
What do
until
we
you
do?
give us the
Can I
name,
reply to that?
It means nothing.
Can I reply
And
to that?
even, no, let me just finish.
Let him finish, sorry.
Even if you do bring his name, he has to be a trusted scholar. He has to be a known scholar, and he
Yeah.
has
No
to
one to
actually
us,
have
and then we have to
credentials.
do.
Yeah.
See the difference.
That's what we have.
So
Trusted and
let me reply to that. So let me reply to that.
You didn't provide any.
Okay, well, I'm sorry that you're not listening to the evidence that I'm providing, but the evidence
you
is
did
there.
say accurate and
Firstly, let's be honest. Claiming that they've got to be a trusted scholar is a bit of a non sequitur argument. The reason why it's non sequitur is
do you
because
believe
here is a scholar that's telling you your text of the Quran has been changed, and obviously you're going to say that he's not a
Remember, the
trustworthy
people that
scholar.
write the Bible
You
are
said,
anonymous. No one else
no, sorry, you asked for me to let him finish. Now show me the same courtesy. Now show me the same courtesy.
Sorry, go on.
Right. So the fact of the matter is, he's saying you've got to trust that you've got to use a trusted scholar. Well, I trust Daniel Allen Brubaker, PhD.
Okay.
But you guys are going to say he's not a trustworthy scholar. So appealing to trustworthy scholars is just a way of saying I only believe those scholars that say what I want to hear.
Never said that, bro.
Right? Now, let me finish. Let me finish. Because I don't know if any one of you witnessed it, But Muhammad Hijab, right, had a Muslim scholar called Dr. Yasser Qadi on his YouTube channel.
Yeah, I see it.
Right, and the interview, he asked this question to Dr. Yasser Qadi. He said, Dr. Yasser Qadi, if I give you a blank mushaf, what's a mushaf?
Quran.
No, it's an empty book. There we go. That's what a mushaf is. What would you write in it? Now, the obvious answer that Dr. Yasser Qadi should have said, is something like, well, the text of the Hafs Quran that was published in 1924 in Cairo. But he didn't say that. What was Dr. Yasser Qadi's reply? He said, Aki, it's not that simple. How is it not that simple if every Quranic text is the same?
You never said that.
That is exactly what he said.
I said that.
No,
I told you about
Dr. Yasser Qadi said that.
He's kafir. We don't even take his
Oh, he's kafir. He's kafir. So there you go. They're only scholars if I agree with them.
He's
When we explained the whole thing about different letters and variations, I explained that. I said,
no, he's not
I
going to
acknowledge
trick me
that.
the people that
Right, hold on one second.
But you said, I said,
I
there's
don't listen.
No. I was really responding to these two
Christian
guys.
did it to me for a second.
Okay, with all due respect, I haven't seen that interview, and I'm not well
I have.
informed in Yasser Qadi.
I have seen it.
Okay, well, I haven't, so I can't really respond to you.
His name was
And I
just
can't
there.
trust you.
Yeah.
His name was just, I was just talking to another fellow about him. He's Murtad. We don't even listen to him.
There you go. We don't like this scholar because he says something we don't like, which is exactly what I said that they would say. It's exactly why they said that they would say.
He is not saying his views because he doesn't like his personality.
No.
Maybe there's some evidence.
Of course it is.
Let's say there's a scholar who comes along and he's
Wallahi,
known.
he's going
I'm not
against
saying
the
that
Quran and
Yasser Qadi is that. I'm just giving you a plain
No,
example.
that person.
I don't know about Yasser Qadi.
That's his name.
What's your name, bro?
My name's Salman.
Nice to meet you, Salman.
Listen, there could be a scholar who's known to be untrustworthy, who has very heretical views, or whatever. The
seen
main
some of the
body of
LGBT
scholars are
stuff
not
he
going to
said.
accept it.
It's pretty bad.
Or his works.
It's not bad.
He may have good
Murtad of Islam.
works in
And
certain
don't listen to him.
specific,
He's of Islam. Why we not
places that they may, see, but generally he will not be taken. So he has to be trusted.
That's that basic-
Just having a PhD does not make you an Islamic scholar, with all due respect. You have to actually learn the Quran. Learning classical Arabic does not make you a scholar on the linguistics of the Quran. Because that's classical Arabic and the Arabic in the Quran are not identical, the same.
Right. So my point is that all you're doing is affirming my point, which is that when a scholar says something you don't like, you try to dismiss the scholar. So appealing to scholars is not the way to proceed with the argument.
It is because the scholars have studied the Quran very thoroughly and the language behind it.
And
Has
Daniel,
he studied the Quran very thoroughly?
yes,
Where has he studied it?
yes, he studied the text of the Quran very thoroughly.
No, I'm saying the actual Quran.
He studied the history of the Quran in its early manuscript tradition.
According to what? The Hadith and
According to his PhD, which has to undergo a Viva, which means that other scholars have to pass him on his Viva for him to get accreditation. Without the Viva, there's no accreditation. And that means that it wasn't just him that wrote a book, it means that other scholars agree that he is making a legitimate academic point.
So
That's how it works in Western
other scholars
education.
agree he's making academic point.
He's making an academic
Islamic
point.
scholars.
Muslim and non-Muslim, yes, there would have been Muslim. I don't know for a fact, but I'm willing to bet that on the. I'm willing to bet.
One mainstream scholar that is widely accepted that agrees and actually agrees with what he's saying.
No, but there you go. This is the fallacy of that I've already exposed. You're simply trying to dismiss any scholar you don't like.
It's not about me. I'm saying mainstream.
Dr. Alan Brubaker is mainstream. Dr. Alan Brubaker is mainstream.
I think I've seen, again, don't take my word for it, but I've seen a lot of things with these manuscripts adding and erasing stuff. It's literally just kind of adds. So, for example, in Surah Tawbah, there's been an adding that don't say Bismillah in the name of Allah because it's in the middle. There's been a lot of stuff, just instructions, and some scholars took it as taken away from the Quran and changing it, even though it was just instruction for the reader to guide them through the verse. A lot of them have been like that. So I'm not saying all of them, but a large part has been also with the numerals, adding the number of the verse.
Try to pay attention though.
It's actually a major thing. It's not like a minor thing, one or two verses. It's been in a lot of them. I'm not saying it's all of them, but I'm saying you always have to look deeper.
Can I ask you a question? You're making a claim that the Quran has been changed. Are you trying to link that to the lack of preservation of the Quran?
No, what I'm demonstrating.
It's been what do you call it again? Corrupted.
Well, it's definitely been corrupted.
The Quran.
Yeah, but let me be clear exactly what my claim is, right? One, I'm not saying that the text of the Quran has been massively corrupted.
Even in a single dot.
Let me finish.
Yes.
Like you got to understand you got to understand my claim, right? I am willing to agree with Muslims that in terms of the stability of the text, the Quran has been a largely stable text. I would even say that it's a largely stable text, and I would even go so far as to say I'm happy to say that percentage of stability is above 90%. I'm even willing to go so far as to say it's above 95%.
You believe
right?
it or just for the sake of argument?
No, I actually believe that the Quran has been basically, essentially preserved. I'm willing to concede that point. And the reason why the reason why I'm willing to concede that point is because the evidence supports that idea. But what the evidence does demonstrate is that it has not been preserved 100%. The text has not been preserved 100%, and that means the Quran has not been preserved 100%.
I would disagree with that.
So you explain
Can I show you why?
Yeah.
Okay, there's a difference between text and saying the Quran. Let's say there's 100,000 Qurans in the world. Example, I could come as a human being. No one's preventing me. I could buy a Quran, or I can get it put stuff, and I could change it, and I can add it into the market.
Like these.
Physically, people could do that.
Yeah.
However, the Quran is above manipulation or corruption of it, because the Quran is not just text.
Yep.
The Quran word means recitation.
Right.
It is memorized by millions of people.
Yes.
The Quran is a recitation. At the time of the Prophet Muhammad, there were no texts.
May I reply?
Can I just finish?
Yeah, of course.
At the time of Prophet Muhammad, they didn't rely on texts. They relied on recitation and memorization. So even if every single Quran was corrupted, forget 95%, even 100, 95, 98% of them were corrupted. You can bring one just like that.
Okay.
So the Quran is not a book, it is not a text, it's a recitation. So you may be able to prove a point that, okay, a couple books here and there, or maybe thousands, whatever, have been changed, but you cannot link that to the Quran.
Okay,
the
so
Quran is a recitation.
Now let me reply. Right, I've heard your argument, I understood what your argument is, and to demonstrate that I'm very briefly going to summarise your argument, and then you can confirm if I understood. That demonstrations of individual codexes being changed doesn't affect the Quran, because the Quran is a recitation, and that recitation is memorised and passed down.
That's how it's preserved.
I'm literally summarising your argument to make sure that I'm not missing your argument.
That's how it.
Have I been fair in my summary?
One thing, and that is how it's been preserved.
Yes, right. So that's the assertion. Right, but here's why that assertion is itself wrong.
Tell me why.
Right, Salman, right?
Yes.
Here's why that assertion is wrong. Because at the Battle of Yamama, when a number of reciters of the Quran were killed, 86, right? The instinctive response to that tragedy of the early Muslim community was not for Zayd to go and sit down with a couple of narrators of the Quran that was perfectly recited and then sit down and just write out what they recited. His response to the death of so many reciters of the Quran was to go and find manuscripts and use these manuscripts and collect them together to produce a mushaf.
He did not.
No, let me finish. I listened carefully to this. I'm replying to Salman's argument. You can make your own. But the point is, that means that in the early community of Muslims, when the threat of the preservation of the Quran occurred, they understood the Quran as being needing to be preserved via text, in text. In other words, they didn't have the confidence that you are stating now. What you're stating is a later invention of Muslims. Muslims at the time of Muhammad, if you believe the Hadiths, didn't have that confidence. Because if they did, then Zayd bin Thabit would have just sat down with 4 or 5 reciters, because he's got his witnesses then, and just write down everything that they said. But he didn't do that. He went out and he looked for fragments, bones, leaves, and then he compiled it into a mushaf.
This was after Uthman.
No, this was at the time of Uthman.
Before his leave.
Abu Bakr and Uthman both.
Yeah, this is after Abu Bakr. This is at the time of Uthman, after the Battle of Yamama. Right? No. Now, my point to you is, therefore, that what you're saying is a later Muslim invention. If you believe your hadiths. If you believe your hadiths, then that means that the Muslims, and also this as well, one final point and then I'm done. I've been to mosques when they are teaching the recitation of the Quran so that people can memorize it. And in every single one of those examples, and I've seen 3 examples with my own eyes, they're using a text. So in other words, when you're saying, oh yes, Muslims have learned to recite the Quran, well, the obvious question is, how did they learn to recite the Quran? And all of them learned to recite it using a text, which means that the security of the recitation is connected to the security of the text. If the text has changed, the recitation is changed.
I'll address your both points, and I'll address the second one before the text is always beneficial. It always makes things easier to use the text and the recitations.
Yeah.
However, for me personally, for example, I've memorized a lot of the Quran just by hearing it.
Yeah.
Never even opened the book. So you can use both. It's not a case of you are dependent on the text, but the text certainly can help you to be more concise.
Makes things easier.
Yeah. However, to address your first point, which is taking the verses from the bones and from the leaves and from basically manuscripts, that is to show how careful they were with the preservation of the Quran. Because you cannot imagine if he took 4 men, for example, and one of them makes a mistake. But in order for him to be more careful, what he did is he took from multiple places. He took the text and he took the recitation and then he put it in the book. Because if he imagine having the responsibility to write down the Quran for all people. I think that is actually one of the scary things, because that's why he was scared.
Yeah, he said you're asking me to do something that Muhammad didn't do.
No,
it's like asking me to carry the weight of a mountain or something, or move a mountain.
That's not what he said. What he said is, it would be easier if you asked me to carry a mountain. He did not say.
That was more or less what I just said. I was paraphrasing.
No, he said the Prophet did not do it. Zayd did not say that.
Yeah, Zayd said you've asked me to do something.
That's Abu Bakr. That's what Abu Bakr said.
Oh, okay,
Zayd
fair
did not
enough.
say that. But
I'll
anyhow,
stand corrected.
Thank you. But the point is, that is only showcases how careful they were, because they were so afraid of making a mistake, even though it was very unlikely that they made a mistake. That's why they used all these sources to make sure that everything is on point.
Right. Can I reply?
Yes.
Before I reply, is there anything you want to add or take away from what he said?
Yeah, I wouldn't add anything.
Okay. So my reply to that is this. In the same hadiths that you use to believe in the compilation of the Quran, those same hadiths talk about certain surahs of the Quran being larger than they are now currently found. Those same hadiths that talk about some surahs of the Quran being larger than they are now currently found also state that there used to be in the Quran a verse about stoning.
Yes.
And that stoning verse is now no longer found in the Quran.
Yes.
And that Muslims, the Muslim that recites this hadith is worried that the future Muslims will end up forgetting to do something that Allah has commanded them to do,
yes,
because it's no longer found in the Quran of his day.
Yes.
So what we've got in the same hadiths that you're using to justify the idea that the Quran was compiled and brought together are clear statements in those same hadiths that some surahs are now much smaller today than they were at the time of Muhammad. That means, right, assuming that these hadiths are true, that the Muslims of Muhammad's time had a different Quran to you today.
Remember what you said earlier, though. You said earlier that you think hadiths were made up.
Yes.
To reconcile the fact that there are multiple recitations.
Correct.
Yes, but now you're using hadith to demonstrate that there was.
Great. I'll be consistent. I'll chuck them all out if you will agree to chuck them all out with me.
No.
Right, then I can use them then.
I can, but I'll tell you what that demonstrates. What that demonstrates is the aggravation of those verses, because if you think that hadiths were made up to reconcile the fact that there were different verses, then that means that those would have been taken out, because those do not prove the point. However,
simple question, Amir.
Yeah.
May I? Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Let me finish your point.
If it's on the same point, yeah.
Okay. So when I was quoting the hadith, not quoting, but when I was referencing the hadith that talked about the stoning verse, you were saying yes. Do you agree that there is a hadith that talks about the stoning verse being in the Quran at the time of Muhammad? Yes. Do you agree that same hadith says that it is no longer found in the Quran?
It's no longer in the Quran.
It's no longer in the Quran. Is it therefore fair for me to say that at the time of Muhammad there was a Quran that existed that is different from the Quran that you have today?
There were verses that were aggravated, yes.
Right. So therefore, when I claim that your Quran today is not the Quran that Muhammad had, I'm not lying, am I?
You're being imprecise.
Did the Quran at Muhammad's time have the stoning verse?
Yes.
Does
But it
your
was
Qur-
aggravated in his time.
does your Quran today have that verse?
No, but it was aggravated at the time of the
Abrogated,
Prophet.
abrogated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Abrogated at the time of the Prophet.
Right.
Including the breastfeeding verses, including a lot of verses.
Yep.
Literally, the hadith about the stoning verses demonstrates that they have not been lost due to loss of manuscripts.
Yep.
Because Omar clearly says we memorized those verses. So Omar himself narrating knows the verses, but he said they were abrogated and the ruling stayed. And if it was not that he was afraid that people would forget that,
Yep.
he would have put it. That means he knows it. It's something that people knew, but because the Prophet abrogated it, that's
Yep.
why it was taken out.
Right, so the first point of my claim then is now established. The Quran of today is not the same as the Quran of Muhammad's time.
Let me. One second.
Go on, I'll let you,
one
yeah,
second.
yeah.
I will just say that the Quran that we have today is the same that was at the time of the death of the Prophet.
Right, so now let me respond to that. Because the Quran is just a giant mess, right? Here's why. The Quran permits the drinking of alcohol and the praying towards Jerusalem, but then abrogates it with other verses, does it not?
Yes.
Right, yeah, right, but those verses can still be found in the Quran. So what we've got are three examples. Two examples of verses that are abrogated that can still be found in the Quran, and one example of a verse that is abrogated that can't be found in the Quran. In other words, there is no consistency about how the Quran was written. In other words, we've got examples of abrogated verses that you can still find, and examples of abrogated verses that you can't find. There's no consistency in the methodology of the compilation of the Quran.
It's not the compilation, it's what the Prophet ordered.
I have a better idea.
Yes.
I have a better solution.
Yeah.
That a lot of what you believe about the Quran was invented after Muhammad's death.
I wouldn't. Literally, the same hadith. The hadiths prove our point, because if
They also prove my point.
if it looked bad for them to say those things, they wouldn't have said it. Which is what you're saying, that hadiths were made up. If that was the case and things were being made up, taken away in order to make a narrative, that would mean that we cannot find those hadiths. That hadiths would have been lost.
But even then, those same hadiths that we use tell us that Muslims were disputing about how to recite the Quran.
Yes.
Remember when the Muslim armies were on the verge of invading Armenia, and not the companions, but the leaders of the armies went back to the companions and said, save the people because they're arguing over how to recite the Quran.
Yes.
Why would you argue? Now remember, this is after the death of Muhammad.
Yes.
Right? Because you said, and so I'm responding to your argument directly, you said, okay, the Quran that was around when Muhammad was alive is different from the Quran that we have today, but it is the same as the Quran that was there at Muhammad's death.
Yes.
But the hadiths that we're using also state that after Muhammad's death, Muslims were arguing about how to recite the Quran.
Yes.
And they were falling out with one another.
Islam was present.
Right. So my point to you is, your own hadiths are saying that even after the death of Muhammad, Muslims were arguing about how to recite the Quran.
That is why we go back to authoritative figures, because due to the large and quick spread of Islam, it was natural that these things would arise. That's why we go to authoritative figures such as Zayd, such as Uthman, and they're the ones who know, who has been there from the beginning, who understand these things. And the newbies who come newly into Islam and have some disputes, and someone heard this and someone heard that, their opinion is not as valid as the ones when you go back to Uthman or Zayd. That's why we take them over the new people.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
But for me, what this demonstrates, this for me confirms my essential argument, which is that the Quran has largely been preserved. And I'll even go further and I'll say that the essential message of the Quran is completely uncorrupted. The essential message of the Quran is definitely there. It has not been changed. The idea that there's one God, that Allah is that God, that Muhammad is his prophet, that Allah is one, that he doesn't have partners, that you shouldn't commit shirk. I accept that has been preserved.
Yeah.
Right? But the idea, the claim that Muslims make that the Quran has been perfectly preserved, for me, dot for dot, word for word, which is people like Zakir Naik, Shabia Ali, Ahmadidat, Mansour, Muhammad Hijab, Amir, all of these people that make that claim are wrong. The evidence supports that the Quran has been subject to small change.
Text-wise, and I already told you the Quran is
Both
not...
text and qiraat, so both text and recitation. So Qira'at is about the dialect.
Dialects.
It's about the recitation.
And I say the qira'ats, even the tones of recitations, let alone the words,
Yeah.
are preserved.
And I think that's
If
just
you go to Egypt, if
Yep.
you go to Saudi, if you go to, they all have different
Yes.
qira'ats, or maybe,
I've witnessed it, yes.
tones and everything.
Yes.
Even that. I was
Yes.
watching a show the other day and they were reciting the same surah, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ, and they were doing it in different tones. Forget dialects, the tones have been preserved. Forget the
right.
words.
Okay, so let me reply to that, because this demonstrates my other point,
Which is?
right. So Amir already knows this example, but in the Wash version of the Quran, in a particular surah and ayah, and forgive me, I don't have it on me, so I can't show you exactly where it is. It talks about the prophets or the holy men fighting in the way of Allah.
Okay.
But in the Hafs it says that they die in the way of Allah. Now, would you agree with me that there is a difference between fighting and dying? They are not the same thing.
You can't fight and die.
You can fight and die, but
Let me just, I'll tell you how.
Yeah.
If you went and fought in the way of Jesus, for example, and you died, if I say you fought in the way of Jesus, that's not a lie.
right. But answer me this: is fighting the same as dying?
No, it's not the same.
Right. So when you've got one version of the Quran that says that they fought, and another version of the Quran that says they
That's the
died,
translator's problem.
no, it's in the Arabic.
It's not translation.
Not translation.
Yeah,
It's in the Arabic.
It's both qira'ats.
It's both.
It's in the Arabic.
Both are
So that means that in that particular verse, in that particular story, one version of the Quran gives a slightly different meaning than the other version of the
What's the
Quran.
word used here? قاتل.
قاتل وانقتل قاتل وانقتل.
One قتل.
Yeah,
One is
قتلوا and
قتلوا,
قاتل.
one is قاتل.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, but the root
Yes.
is the same.
Even I remember the Arabic.
But it's the same.
And I remember it from reading it.
Well, we say they're both valid, they're both the same. Because what I told you earlier is these things only enrich and add to the text, they never take away from the text. So we would say both fighting and dying would be valid in the text, and it would be correct to say, and it would be authentic basically.
Okay, so I'm happy
They're not
to.
contradictory.
I'm happy to continue this discussion. I'd like to invite you both to come for a cup of tea. Okay, Salman, I really appreciate talking to someone of integrity and politeness, and so I want to thank you very much, and you, Amir, for having a really friendly dialogue. I'd like to give you a gift, if I
Can I
may.
have the book, by the way? I'll bring it.
Well, let's go to there. I'd like to give you a gift. Okay? Yeah. Well, I mean, do you want a large gift or a small gift?
Brother, make it a small gift.
I'll give you a small gift then. Okay? This is just to show my appreciation. I don't come here to have shout down arguments like with that guy. I prefer to have intelligent kind of conversations. Okay, there you go. Little gift. Just to show my appreciation.
We'll see, I'll read it.
Yeah, and if you wanna come and talk to me again, Salman, I'd really love to talk to you again. All right, you look after yourself, bro. God bless. Take care. Amir, thank you so much. Let's go grab a cup of tea. You're more than welcome to join us if you want.
Thank you very much for that.
All right, another time.
I'll be with you in a second.
Yeah, of course. Any questions on what you heard? Peace be with you, bro.